Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We are back at it again. This is another installment of the PPB open panel show where I come on, have a good conversation about what is the pressing topic of the week, to have that kind of nuanced dialogue. Per usual, I'm always allowing or open to people wanted to come on and having the good faith conversations on the platform. Of course, the people that decided to come on and have these great conversations, my guy Elijah, my guy Danny, how are you both doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Just grilling with school and working forward. I've been trying to be more active on social medias and stuff. I was just live streaming with someone a couple days ago, and I've been getting back into the groove of making episodes and stuff. So, been talking about a lot of the recent stuff going on. So, I've been doing good.
Yeah, I've just been finishing my move-in, cleaning, and waiting to get a response back from my lawyer about my immigration papers.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Seems like we all got stuff going on, and yeah, the conversation of the week is technically politically related. At first, I was hesitant to have the conversation, but I do think this kind of opens up a broader dialogue on people's not only feelings of the halftime show, but kind of more so their feelings about immigrants, so to speak. So I do think that's a worthwhile dialogue to have. So before we kind of dive into like the nitty gritty of the immigration and politics, did you guys watch the Super Bowl? And do you have thoughts about the halftime show?
Yeah, I watched the Super Bowl. I will say I'm one of the most unsportsly people on the planet. I just don't know anything about football. I don't watch any of it, any of the sports or whatever, right? I will say I was the most engaged during this game out of any game I've ever seen because I have never seen somebody care less than the quarterback for the Patriots. I have just never seen somebody try so little and be so indifferent to every single play that was made on the field. Like every single time they would pan the camera to him, whether he just threw a pass that was good or whether they just lost the entire game, he's just nonchalantly standing there trying to RF farm. I couldn't believe how indifferent and uncaring this player was. I was locked in on him the whole time. It was so frustrating. And I also thought that the halftime show was really bad. I thought it was really terrible. I thought that there were qualities of it that were really good, but I just thought that there are lots of aspects we'll get to that I thought was really bad. Not as bad as the Turning Point USA halftime show, but still bad.
Yeah, so I'm in Germany, obviously, and I did not watch it at all. I didn't even know that the Super Bowl was happening until a day beforehand. But I did hear about some of the controversy over the last few months with Bad Bunny going to be performing because he performs in Spanish as opposed to in English. And ultimately, I mean, I did watch the halftime show afterwards on the internet. It wasn't great. I've never been that impressed with them in the first place, though. But it also wasn't really offensive, and it just seemed like something that MAGA wanted to get worked up about. And then there was apparently this TPUSA halftime show with Kid Rock out of like every washed up celebrity.
Yeah, I'm be honest. You guys are not breaking the stereotype that white people are not cultured. So you guys are just like embracing that fact by hating on this halftime show. But for me, when it comes down to this halftime show, I'm not a big Bad Bunny fan. Uh, his music doesn't appeal to me, but there's definitely a vibe. You could definitely party. You could dance to it. I'm sure people have, and I know people that do. I will say that this is kind of a celebration for a very specific culture, which shout out, especially in our current political climate. And I will also say that this is the type of show that like it's not about like necessarily it's not necessarily going to be for everybody in terms of the music and the quality of music, and then the obviously the words that they're saying, but you could still vibe out. You could still vibe out for sure in the in the melodies, in the vibes. So shout out Bad Bunny. This is definitely a interesting one in terms of like subjective music feeling, but ultimately the broader conversation is how people were so angry about it, not necessarily because it was music they do not like or that it was a terrible performance, which I disagree with it being a terrible performance, but they didn't like it because it was someone speaking Spanish in an American country. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I will say that the Spanish speaking was actually, I mean, I know nothing about it, right? But that really wasn't part of the problem. I think for me, like there must have been some technical issue because when I was seeing videos of the halftime perspective of people in the audience, the sound quality was way better. But from our perspective, it was literally just a reggaeton beat and him monotonely speaking out of rhythm for the entire performance. There was no band, there was no background track, there was no like musicality to it. It was just and then him just like chanting at you, and that was the whole thing. And so I just thought that musicality, like wise, it was just bad, and I did not like the Lady Gaga rendition of that song. I've heard other people perform it significantly better than how it was performed. Like it's not even that the combination of the two is bad. It's just I think that
Hating
she
on
did
my girl,
a bad
Lady
job.
Gaga.
No. I
Nasty
love Lady
word.
Gaga. You literally can't hate Lady Gaga, but I thought that this performance was bad. What I will say though is that the music video of it was really cool. Like I would be throwing a fit if I bought tickets to that, and then that's what I got to see from an audience perspective, just because it was impossible to see what was going on. But the actual music video that's played on TV, I thought was really cool. But people hating on it because it's Spanish, just like, come on, there are better reasons to hate on this than it being like, if we're gonna be racist, let's be like a little smarter about it. If we're if we're gonna do that, we don't need to be hating the obvious stuff here. So yeah, no, I wouldn't agree too much.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything astounding or anything. It was just very typical like reggaeton music. I couldn't really hear it so well with the audio quality. But I could kind of pick up a couple of words here and there. It did seem like he was more there just for the dancing and for the show itself than for the singing itself. So I guess you can criticize that. But ultimately, when it comes down to him speaking Spanish, and that was the main controversy surrounding this whole thing, it's just a stupid criticism. And I don't even know who ended up actually watching the TP USA show.
Yeah, I call it this term. This is the term that I coined for it because I think MAGA, for the most part, because they're the ones complaining about it, I think it's hilarious how MAGA is exactly who they hated in the first place because they act like wokies all the time. And this is the perfect example where they're just like acting like wokies, and this is kind of fake outrage. There's not really a thing to be mad at because America has embraced the idea of like different cultures and different languages a lot throughout our history. This is not a indifferent thing. Despacito was number one for the longest time, and that song was not that good, but it was vibes, it was dancing. People were like Despacito. Apparently, the translation was horrific in terms of like the sexual nature of it. So the people love that song. That was number one for a long time. Gangnam Style, another song that is not good, but that was number one for the longest time. You could probably go into a lot of different examples where there's like music that is a different language or music that, if we're talking about the English lyrics, are super, super basic. It's just about how you feel. It's a good vibe, all that stuff. So this idea that they're mad because it was in Spanish is fake wokeness, and this is just backlash for two things in particular. It's backlash because this guy is clearly not a Trumpy, and it's backlash because you guys are propagating the message that you hate immigrants. And I think not only is this a conversation that is beyond at this point the illegal immigrant pandemic or epidemic that they claim that was happening. No, they're making their voices very clear at this point. It was never about illegal immigration. They just don't want immigration. So that I think that messaging is starting to expand a lot to a like majority section of the MAGA party where they're okay with the idea that these people shouldn't be in our country, period. No stop.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true that there's a lot of racism behind this, and people are all of a sudden having a lot of problems with this Spanish music being at a very American event, which is hilarious given, again, how we do embrace foreign music a lot. I mean, we see, for example, Spanish music being played regularly in bars across the United States. We also hear songs like 99 Luftballon at bars and at karaoke sets. You do hear Japanese music. So this is just really stupid that people are getting mad at it for this reason. And if you're going to criticize the show because you genuinely thought the show was bad or you don't like his music or whatever, that's a legitimate critique. Um, but all of these complaints about Hispanic music and how we're subverting our culture are incredibly dumb, especially when we've had people like Rihanna, who isn't American or not from America originally, as well as Shakira, who performed at the halftime shows, and she does a ton of songs in Spanish.
Yeah, this might be getting a little too left leaning for me. What I will say is that I don't know if it's necessarily racist to dislike the show because it's spoken in another language, as long as you're consistent with that generally. Like, I think a lot of these people, like people being from other countries having performed, like isn't Coldplay from like the UK or something, and some of these other people have been from other countries, but none of them are doing an entire show in a language that they don't understand. I don't think that the language that is being spoken really matters that much. But I do understand that I do understand the vibe that it gives off, and I do think that it is kind of inherently political because of the way that the conservatives have set up the conversation right now. Sadly, something like language that probably shouldn't be political is political. So this does come off as a statement. Like, it does come off as something that's, we are trying to bring up our Spanish speaking brethren in the country. And I think that for a stage as big as the Super Bowl, it might have been overkill if Bad Bunny's numbers weren't supported. Now, I'm looking at his Spotify numbers right now, and like his top 20 songs have over 1 billion streams, which is just like insane. Like, those numbers are nuts. I do not know the American audience for this, which I think would be the deciding factor. I don't know if and I'm just looking at like, I don't know if this site is real or not, but these numbers are huge. But I don't know about the American audience. So I could see the frustration if like most of Bad Bunny's audience was in Spanish speaking countries, but in America, nobody liked him. And then they put him on there. Like, I feel like that's some pretty good, I don't know if you should say outrage, but you could say that the Super Bowl made a dumb and bad decision, and I understand why people wouldn't want to watch it. I'm just saying, I don't think it's racist on its face to do that. It most likely is for a lot of people, but I don't think that inherent. I think you could pick any language. Like, if a German guy came and did the entire concert in German, I think people would have the same issue. But maybe this is my whiteness speaking, I don't know. But like, to me, I think that people would have the same problem given any language. But it feels especially political because of all of the ICE stuff, because of all the anti, Spanish speaking rhetoric and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if I'm on board with all of this, but yeah.
So the reason why I am not willing to buy the idea that this isn't like a kind of like race-based, or at the very least the hatred beyond the music itself, is perfectly personified on some of the things that have been said about the show. Because these are not critiques about the music, these are critiques about the individual performing the music. Like, for example, this is why I was like, okay, this is a conversation worth having on a larger scale to talk about the new sentiment of Hispanic people in America. Because Jake Paul, don't like the guy, but he's a very popular dude. He had a tweet that went crazy viral, and he said, purposefully turning off the halftime show. Let's rally together and show big corporations they can't just do whatever they want without consequence, which equals viewership for them. You are their benefit. Realize you have power. Turn off this halftime. A fake American citizen performing who publicly hates America. I cannot support that. And just to you provide a very interesting like duality for this is that his brother Logan Paul re-quote tweeted this saying, I love my brother, but I don't agree with this. Puerto Ricans are Americans, and I'm happy they were given the opportunity to showcase that talent that comes from the island. And he's right. Puerto Ricans are Americans. So this is not about the music. It's about the person performing the music. It's about that he represents a characteristic that's in this current climate is demonized, and people that are just speaking the language of Spanish can be racially profiled and deemed illegal, that should be thrown out the country. I think it goes far beyond that. And I'm about to look up what Megyn Kelly says, because Megyn Kelly's a known just hater of immigrants. But yeah, that's why I think it's kind of beyond that. What are your thoughts?
I mean, based on what you've said and what I've heard from conservatives complaining about it, I do agree that it is a matter of being like anti-immigrant sentiment in many ways. And I saw some really dumb comments saying, of course, that Puerto Ricans aren't Americans, as you just said, which is not the case. Puerto Ricans are Americans, actually, according to Section 101A 38 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. A person born in Puerto Rico acquires U.S. citizenship in the same way as one born in any of the 50 states. They have a unique culture, that's for sure. A lot of them speak Spanish, and also just on the whole language thing, I would argue that since Spanish is above and beyond the second most spoken language in the United States, and it's only appropriate to have a guy who speaks Spanish at the halftime show every so often. And the last thing I'd like to say is that the NFL is not a liberal organization. It's pretty conservative in many ways, and definitely tries to appeal to a more conservative fan base.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that too. I would just say that I don't think it's inherently racist to dislike this show because of the language thing. Like when I'm listening to the Paul brothers tweet, I don't know what about that is racist necessarily. Like it's just protesting something that he would say is anti-American, and like it's the same as saying like we don't want to platform this person because they hate blah 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 and we like blah blah blah. It'd be the same kind of protest that I think is somewhat justified. Unless I'm missing something, I don't see the racism in that tweet unless the undertones are racist or unless that person is racist. I don't know if simply disliking it, because with like I think Shakira is a great example of like a middle thing where you have a show that has some songs in Spanish too, and I think people were mad about that even then, which I found was hilarious. But I think people are mad about it then, but I think having the whole show in Spanish is kind of a step above, you know, what the representation of the American people is supposed to be like. I guess we did have Lady Gaga sing one song, which was good. But I don't know. I think I would stay by this. I don't see the racism in this inherently, despite maybe a lot of the dog whistles that very racist people are probably making as well.
I mean, I can agree that not liking the fact you don't understand Spanish being sung might annoy some people, and it's not inherently racist. But overall, like a lot of these comments are really, really dumb, especially when you have Megyn Kelly saying that that kind of football is ours. anything the Super Bowl halftime show shouldn't be anything other than good old fashioned American Pie. Like, what the hell does that even mean? Given the fact that the United States is already so diverse in what would differentiate the different regions of the country, as well as the very different just cultures in those regions. I mean, for example, if you had a guy from New Orleans, it wouldn't look like typical American pie. And in many ways, it seems like they're trying to call on this form of nationalism, which doesn't really exist in the United States. I would argue that the United States is too diverse to really have a coherent nation in the original definition of nation.
She also said this is supposed to be a unifying event for the country, not for the Latinos. So my thing is, when it comes down to like words, I do like understand that if you kind of isolate the verbiage, you can potentially kind of remove itself from the notion of racism. But I think knowing the context of the current climate and the undertones underlying that this person's not an American citizen, and that perceived notion of not being an American citizen that only comes from the fact that he is Spanish. I'm be honest, of like the not knowing that he's an American citizen from Jake Paul. I think he had the generalized notion from that because of the current climate of thinking that people who are Spanish, who speak Spanish, who sound different, those people are not us. They're not one of us. So there's a clear like separation from Latinos, Hispanic people from what is American citizens to these right-wing individuals. And that separation also is a undermining of their value, because if you're not American, you're not worth it. So that's why it's like beyond the kind of words itself, knowing the context of the situation. If you go out of your way and you see a person and you're like on the street and they speak Spanish and they look Spanish, and you immediately perceive them as an illegal immigrant who shouldn't be in my country, that is the overall vibes that I'm getting from this. And this performance from the from my perception of what like MAGA is seeing from Bad Bunny's performance is someone that is adhering to the people that are not one of us and that should be out of my country. So that's how this whole entire scenario within context can be looked at as racist.
Yeah, I think that language is one of the only empathetic. I think that sometimes people are just different, and it's the extension of what you do with that difference that makes something racist or immoral or bad. And I think I am most empathetic to differences in languages for like the self and then the other, because if somebody like can't communicate with me, that doesn't devalue them or make something moral, but it like I feel as if that separation is so strong and so powerful that I understand people's apprehensions. Now, I don't think it should apply to anything about, citizenship. It depends on the extension of what you're doing. And if the extension is that I don't want to, I don't like this show, I don't want to support this, I think that that's a fine extension, because I do think that a language barrier is such a strong, like you just lose so much utility in speaking in being with that person, that I understand people's distinctions between Americans and different language speaking, because I feel like in a lot of cases there are other things that don't have anything to do with race that would just make taking somebody speaking a different language, it would make them taking that different. I guess I don't know exactly the lines I'm trying to parse here, but I do think that language is a really serious divide when it comes to cultures and race. And I think that divide would exist unrelated to race. Like if Danny was only speaking German to me, he's super white, but that would create a really big disparity between me and Danny as people. And so I just think that like we can put it on race because it happens to be the most controversial people, or the most talked about group of people right now because of ICE. But I do think that I'm very empathetic to differences in language. I think that that's very important.
I mean, differences in language do cause problems among people, especially when it comes to integrating in a culture. And I do think Spanish people should learn English when they come to the United States. I think it would just be, it make their lives easier, allow them to get a job easier, make more friends, and overall everything would just be more enriching for them. They could also earn more money given the fact they'd have more opportunity in different businesses, and then also them being able to speak Spanish would be an even greater perk. Um, However, what I would also say is that these differences with people speaking languages, me personally, has never been a huge issue. Then again, I don't even live in the United States anymore. And I've been around people who don't speak English as a first language my entire life. Regardless, it just doesn't seem to make that much sense to try and dehumanize someone for the language they choose to speak, especially when that person is still a contributing member to society. And other than them speaking another language, they're really not doing anything wrong. Though the way I see it, it's more of a loss for them than it is inherently a loss for me or our society as a whole if they refuse to learn English.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but the extension of dehumanizing is, I think, the separation, like pointing out the inconveniences or the in the inability to engage with something because of language. I don't think is a bad extension at all, but the extension of dehumanizing somebody to a point that something bad happens, like they get deported or something, that's bad. But I do think that we just lose a lot of interaction, kind of like you were saying with language, but taking it further and making it about them as a human or human value, I think is bad. But I don't think that that's necessarily what's happening here. But I agree with what you're saying, though.
Yeah, the other thing is with languages and music, I just point this out as well. It doesn't inherently matter at all times what language a song is being sung in. In fact, some genres, in my opinion, are better in different languages. For example, I think metal is far better in Swedish, German, and Ukrainian or Russian. It's just the way those languages sound. The language itself is also an instrument. And then you hear some of those songs translated into English and they sound ridiculous. So I guess I can kind of understand where people be like, oh, well, this is an American show. But then again, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. A lot of people do speak Spanish in America. And I think ultimately it is a good move to make that American society as a whole is not inherently against Spanish speaking Americans.
Yeah, for me, when it comes down to the situation, I will, to extend an olive branch, I will coincide with the idea that everyone who has an issue with the halftime show, even have an issue with it being all Spanish, is not inherently racist. But I do think that the individuals that make it about his identity and how his identity um, resonates with other people's identity, and that is wrong. Once it becomes about that, then I don't see how it's not racist, because these people see the identity itself as less than. It shouldn't be here. These people are not us. This shouldn't be something like Megan Kelly said, this is ours, not theirs. So there's a very clear separation at that point. There's a very clear undermining at that point. And that's the part that I think is pretty clear that is a racist notion.
Yeah, I think it's super easy for this to become racist. I don't think it's a leap at all to see the jump from not racist to racist. I think this is like one of the biggest gateway drugs to being racist. Although I will say that to say that to respond to this by saying Puerto Rico is part of America, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it seems like it's a category error of some sorts, even though it's true. It just seems to be saying something different. Like, I wonder if two places under the same umbrella could be so culturally different that even though they are under the same umbrella, like calling it America, despite it being categorically true, seems to say something different. Now, a lot of what people hear when they say this is they're going to talk about race, which I don't think matters at all, or they're going to talk about language, which I think kind of matters, but not really that much of the determining factors. But there are definitely other kinds of things that maybe they could believe, or maybe they could, as a culture, understand that would make them different from Americans, even if they're part of by America, I mean U.S. Americans.
I hear you, but would you consider Hawaii and Alaska a part of America?
I was just about to say this. Like Hawaii, I don't know much about these places. I could see them being culturally different enough to say that there may be some sort of more similar to maybe some of the other island areas around them, or like Alaska could be Canadian. Like if you said that Alaska is culturally Canadian, I wouldn't even bat an eye. Like I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
I'll provide this
American, yeah,
because I was born in Hawaii and my family's Samoan. It is much more similar to Samoa than it is from the mainland.
Yes, that's what I would think too. And so it's like, yeah, these things are a part of America, but like I don't know if that does enough. And like you could also be racist to question even that. Again, like technically it is an awesome own to be like Puerto Rico is part of America, dumbass. Like think harder. Like that is a good own. I'm not even gonna try to discredit this, but I do think that if you dig deep into what you're actually saying, we ask conservatives a lot, what do you mean by American? And a lot of the times it's a dog whistle for white people. But I do think that there is a conversation to be had there. Like you do actually have to answer what an American is. And I don't think it's just in a contract, it says you're a part of the Americas. I don't know if that's enough for me. I'm not saying it. I don't know anything about Puerto Rico, but I'm just saying that I think there's more conversation to be had here than just on a piece of paper it says they're American.
All right, let's have that conversation then. Danny, I think you could start off though.
Yeah, I mean, all countries have very different regions of them with different cultures integrated in them. You could say it's not traditionally American, but I would go so far to argue as the United States does not have a consistent national identity in comparison with a place like Japan, who is vigorously trying to defend its national identity to the point they don't even let people into their country from like Korea, um, or even a place that's maybe a bit more diverse like Poland. But the United States, in terms of our country, we have very different ways that English is spoken in different portions of the US. Going beyond that, you have different religious practices, as well as completely different food. Um, and I mean, all of that's part of America. It seems like what these Trumpers are saying is if it's not from the mainland, if it's not from the quote unquote flyover states like Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, then it's not truly America. I mean, I could see these people freaking out also if we had native, like the Cherokee, a Cherokee singer come and perform at the halftime show, and they are arguably more American than we are because they've been here for the last 10,000 ish years. Um, so, and finally, one guy brought up a good point with Texas. Texas is incredibly diverse, especially on the southern border. It's basically Mexico in many ways. In fact, in some of those towns, they mainly speak Mexican. And I think we should also keep in mind that to be a successful politician in Texas or New Mexico often involves needing to speak Spanish or be able to have people who work for you who can translate everything into Spanish for you so you can be successful, especially in these states. So ultimately, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because, like, I would like to first answer then what is America? What makes you American? What is our main culture? And you wouldn't find that. We don't have it in comparison to most other places.
Yeah, my thing is for America, it is a unique case, which also proliferates how we became the number one nation in the world with the strongest military and strongest economy, because of this kind of open mindset, so to speak, in allowing for diversity and really accepting the aspects of liberalism. So our culture is the diversity that we accept, especially noting that there was like obviously, past barriers that kind of restricted people's freedom. And the United States was supposed to be here, like united, obviously, supposed to be here to allow people to kind of express their culture, their beliefs, and their religion. And then eventually it started expanding that, especially the core essence of like freedom of religion and the aspects of liberty. They started realizing that applies to more and more things besides that, to the point where it applies to culture and race. It applies to people allowing to kind of live their own life individually, beyond the kind of normal way, normal nuclear way, normal heterosexual way. So all these things that this allowed provided like a diversity of thought and a lot of innovation. Now, there's like criticisms with everything or every system, but one thing we can say for certain is that with what we've done as a nation, we've become the number one nation, and that's just not undeniable. So now the question is, what it means to be an American is believing in the liberalism, believing in the diversity of thought, believing in kind of being able to achieve the American dream that I do think is dying, arguably died, believing in the US Constitution, a legal framework that abides by all US citizens and most people in this country, as it says in the text. And these are kind of core things. So it dawns on me, and I'll be curious on like your own definition, Elijah. It dawns on me that these are important things that made America great, but we're focusing on kind of like this kind of woke mindset at looking identity. And then these same people are more anti-American because of their willingness to defy liberty and the Constitution. Like it just doesn't make sense to me, because what it means to be American, I mean, like Danny said, it's not about all these values that were orchestrated and created for the people. It's about an identity. That's why they keep on going to very specific times in history to be great. They want the male, nuclear, white, straight Christian individual. So, I mean, I personally always hated woke politics, always hated it, but it's more prevalent than it's ever been in this current administration. Let me be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit exactly what I was going to bring up, is that I think it's a collection of ideas and things that you support. So if you got all of like the super MAGA heads and put them into one place, and then you ask the question, are these guys Americans? I would be like, no, probably not, because they aren't believing in these. I know the mustache comments are really funny to me.
Yeah, he just
I don't
keeps
know.
on going.
I'm assuming it's about
respected
me,
the
but
point.
I'm not sure. I know, Riddle, you got a good stash going on too. But yeah, like if you got a bunch of MAGA people and you put them into one place and you asked, are these people American, or like should we secede? I'd be like, maybe actually, like I would start to not consider them Americans because of the way that they're defining the values that are supposed to be American, which, like you said, would be like an adherence to the Constitution, liberalism, like the American dream, the freedom, the ability to come to a place. I also think the absorption of a bunch of different cultures, I think, is important. I also think that the size of our like literal landmass is a big thing about accepting these cultures too. And so the question is like, is Puerto Rico essentially a glob of MAGA people, like that, something that they believe about liberalism, about freedom, about trade, about, you know, something about what the state should be, is that different enough to consider it not a part of America? Same with Hawaii, same with Alaska, you know what I mean? So like if you get people in Alaska who really love like the Canadian healthcare system, I don't think that's a big enough difference to make them not American. But maybe let's say that bleeds over into these views about, you know, globalized healthcare or something, and like, well, maybe we should force people to pay more taxes, or maybe their gun laws change. You know what I mean? Like you can start to ask these questions that change so much that I would be willing to be like, I don't know if this is America. I would say that MAGA is increasingly less American every single time I hear them say something. I don't think that's even controversial to say. And they probably wouldn't say it either, because they would say that America has changed so much that they don't even want to be a part of it anymore or whatever, right? So, but I do think that we do kind of have an intuitive notion. Like if we imported 50% of China and put the Chinese people, and put it into this country, we would change drastically culturally. And we can see that. And then if we multiplied the population of Puerto Rico and put it and replaced it with the US population, the culture would change dramatically. And so you could do that with any state. But the question is, how different would the changes be? That's true. That's true. I should have thought about that.
No, I mean, I do agree with your points that they are arguably not behaving very American at this point. They're not following liberal values in the Enlightenment sense of the word liberal. But I want to go back to something that Riddell said, that what has become very apparent with MAGA in this current administration is they are very similar to the quote unquote woke left, in the sense that they are obsessed with their identity, trying to protect their identity. And it's more or less just this really literally trumped up version of MAGA politics, but for WASPs, I guess you could say, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That seems to be what we are seeing here with it, and it's part of the reason why I find them so annoying. Is they're effectively just those annoying liberal college kids, but now it's a bunch of like 50 to 70-year-old men and women. That's the only difference.
Yeah, I really think it's that's the only difference as well. Um, you know, for this conversation regarding like America and all that stuff, and like what it means to be American and what it means to assimilate and integration, I do think there's a worthwhile conversation that I wish sane people on the right would have, is what it takes to assimilate into America. Like what are the like processes that would kind of make it make sense? And I do hear this conversation and talking point all the time of like, hey, let's just what happens if you throw a bunch of people into the country? You're gonna ruin the American identity. And I find that fascinating, considering how many like Europeans, especially in the different like world eras, were immigrated into it, and they were more willing to be okay with that because they obviously looked very similar to themselves. And I guess there's a structural similarity, considering America came from Europe. A lot of the original like colonizers came from Europe as well. But they were okay with the adoption of all these different cultures. Like the Irish heavily influenced American culture. Italy took over New York. That was their state at that point. I mean, the way we perceive New York is very Italian. This is completely adopted their culture. So it's interesting to me that this is a talking point of, oh, we can't bring all these people because they might influence our 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 country. My question is, as long as it's assimilated and as long as they abide by liberal principles, the Constitution, abide by freedom, acceptance, all those different things we talked about, who cares? That's my question. Like, who
I would
cares?
just, the only thing I'd push back on is there was a lot of controversy about letting in Irish, Italians, Jews, and Slavs into the United States in the early 19th century or 20th century. And that doesn't change until after World War II, where whites really embraced them as also being white and upholding this culture. But I ultimately do agree with you that they did change American culture. They embraced a lot of the exact same philosophies that the Anglo-Saxons had in the 1700s. And we're seeing that even with a lot of Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians coming in. But the problem is now they're the new scapegoat, effectively.
Riddell, what's your favorite Naruto character?
Yeah, let me answer this guy's very important, valuable question in this podcast. Talk about politics and immigration and identity. My favorite Naruto character is Naruto, the GOAT. Shout out the main character of the series. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think an important metric, and probably it's this is probably hard to ascertain from people, but I think the most important metric is that I think the concern with immigration is that America is a country of change that can like adopt all of these other things, but it has to be able to consensually change. It has to change via the people's votes. And so when you import a large demographic of a specific type of people, that gives them the power to change things dramatically and against the will of maybe what the change was supposed to be, or maybe the will of maybe 50% of the people or something like that. And so if you let this group of people, like if you let them come in, but they don't integrate to the current framework and then change it in the ways that they want it to, I think that that's probably bad. And I think that the way that we do this is like ultimate freedom, which is what America is supposed to be, right? This freedom of speech, freedom of ideas. We got to let people in who disagree with these things. Even if they disagree with the idea of freedom, we have to let them in and do that and something like that. So I'm not sure exactly how we would ascertain this or measure this or figure this out, but it definitely has to be something that lets America be what America is supposed to be. It has to be like this ultimate freedom of all these things.
But where does this fear come from? Like, what have we seen? Because I agree with Danny. There was some like pushback, especially, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, especially people who had issues with the Irish in particular, that came to America. But ultimately, my question is like, where have we seen this be a realistic problem? Where does it come from? Where does this fear come from? And that we were not able to assimilate the people. Like the only example that I could think of that's very clear is when we took over from the Native Americans. We completely changed everything there. But other than that, in terms of grand or like mass immigration, when we had that happen with like the Japanese, with all the Europeans, that they just integrated into America, or we treated them like shit, like in certain camps. So yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think that with this, so with the initial immigration of the people that were on the land, like I don't know if that's necessarily trying to ask the same question of like the Native Americans that were here getting replaced. Like that seems to be like a fundamental different kind of shift. Like that would be the starting point, and then we would move from there. And the other idea too is that these mass immigrations of different groups, I feel like have always been one, people don't like it, like people have always spoke out against it, and that's limited the amount of people. Like I don't think we've had mass immigrations, but that's mass in perspective to the people that we would allow in. Like we would never allow a certain amount of people in, and that's why people are fighting. It's because they fear that that threshold is getting too high. And so if it gets high, that's when we get those problems where suddenly we've been replaced with a group of people that are interested in replacing us. I think like a somewhat valid fear, or like an example of this would be people were scared about Muslims coming in and then trying to enact Sharia law, which they seemed or deemed antithetical to like freedom or something like that. And so I don't think that the numbers supported being scared of this, but they were trying to say is like, we don't want this to happen, and if the numbers get to this moment and based on the current trajectory, we should limit it or we should stop it or something like that. So I think that we've done a pretty good job of stopping large groups of people coming in, even if it's come at the expense of people being very angry about these amount of people coming in.
I mean, I don't think it's much of an issue if there's these quote unquote large groups of people coming in. Most people aren't coming here. I mean, there's a lot of other countries people immigrate to nowadays. I mean, living here in Germany, I see every day tons of Arabs and Turks, and I've even been seeing quite a few Hispanics who have chosen Europe over the United States, especially given Trump coming to power. I think what we should also keep in mind is integration usually takes about a generation. You can't ever expect the first generation to fully integrate, given the fact they did probably spend at least the first like 20, 30, even 40 years of their lives living in their home country in a completely different culture. They may never master the language. And the other thing is with people, though, who immigrate, they're coming here to the United States with an intended goal. And they want to work there or here. They want to contribute to their own bank accounts and in turn contribute to society. So it's in comparison to like the Cherokees or other Native American groups, it's easier to integrate them because they want to be a part of what we have. Whereas when we see this fail, like with African Americans, or in some cases in the past, even Asian Americans, especially Japanese in World War II, it's usually because we try to exclude them. We try to push them to the peripheries of society. And for that reason, we're still having major cultural and economic and political issues.
Well, we already have limits on how many, immigrants from specific countries can come in like per year. There's like a percentage that, we after this moment we either start to slow it down or we stop it or we stop granting visas or whatever. But I guess with like large immigrants, just I want you guys to answer this. But like if 50% of Europeans, or if our population became 50% European, they all just came right from Europe and then came and filled our population, what are the chances you think that our free speech laws would be reevaluated? Like what are the chances that you think that they would start to question like how free our speech could be because of the way that their laws are in Europe?
Sorry, go on, Trudeau.
Oh, what's good, Austin? Austin always shows up. He's a good kid. So I do think sometimes when these hypotheticals are presented, it's necessary to understand like the context of like why this hypothetical makes sense. And for this in particular, I'm answering it directly, but I'm adding a caveat. If these people wanted to come to America, there needs to be an understanding that they are coming here to be American. So I actually don't think that our free speech laws will change if they have a sentiment and understanding that free speech is a important value of what it means to be America. So in order for this like hypothetical to kind of reach the like these drastic measures, then there would have to be some type of reason where people are getting mass immigrated here without the kind of want or intrigue of being a part of the system. You would have to remove that type of mindset. And I don't know what scenario that would make sense in, unless it's like a big war and then that Europe is completely decimated and they are forced to come here. But even then, we wouldn't take in 50%. They would have to we would separate them with all our allies.
The point of this hypothetical is that 50% seems like a pretty obvious threshold to answer this question, and then we're going to keep lowering it down until we get to a percent that's reasonable. What I will say about your point, though, that like immigrants coming here would have to accept are free. I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? Like an immigrant might come here because of the economic prosperity that's available to them, and they're kind of agnostic about the free speech thing, but they're bringing their presuppositions about free speech here, and they're going to bestow that on their kids and something like that. So I don't like, and to say that like they would come here and just like accept like American values is kind of the point. Like that's kind of the fear. That's the thing that we're trying to figure out now when we make the laws about what these things should be. And so to say that they'll just come here and assimilate, if there were 50% of our population, they wouldn't have to. Like they would represent 50% of the votes on things, so they could just vote to end free speech or something like that, right? If they wanted to. This is obviously it's very, very extreme, but the idea is that, you know, you would be asking what is the threshold, and then you've kind of discovered why people are concerned about immigration, because they think that that threshold is way lower than it actually is, or they think that we're approaching that threshold. That's mostly what this is trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but the fear is completely illegitimate. Most people, as you stated, are pretty agnostic when it comes to free speech. And if anything, I think a lot of them see it as a big plus in comparison to a lot of the countries they're coming from. I mean, let's take a look at the Venezuelans coming here, for example. Venezuela is a dictatorship. They can't talk shit. They can't say anything about their leader that's bad without ending up in jail. Heck, I've even talked to Russians who left after the partial mobilization in September of 2022, who've come to America or come to Europe. And they say one of the best parts is you can criticize the government and nothing happens. Like you're okay. So I feel like free speech really wouldn't be threatened. And the only way it could possibly get threatened is if a country picked an American, given the voting laws, to become president, or maybe trained a foreigner from a very young age to basically be a sleeper agent to run for Congress and then start advocating for anti-American or anti-free speech laws. I think the biggest threat mostly comes from within when it comes to free speech. And I think we kind of see that with Trump. And the other way just sounds like a spy novel from like the Cold War. So I don't think that there's been any like Arab, for example, trained by Al Qaeda to come to America, run for Congress, and then try to, you know, get rid of different laws to try and destroy the fabric of the United States.
Yeah, and I do think it's a little bit oxymoronic to come into the country and be anti-free speech, considering that same free speech will allow you to express your identity. So at this point, you're coming into the country and you're trying to advocate for something that denies you to embrace who you are from your other country. I just don't, and this is not to kind of, I'm not trying to like escape from your hypothetical. I'm just trying to make it realistic. The whole mass like immigration stuff, I can engage with that, but it still needs to take into the parameters of what is the likelihood of these individuals' intent to push this narrative. And the understanding of being adopted and assimilated to a country that is not yours, and then the understanding that free speech benefits you as an individual, there is no way there, like Danny said, the only rationale I could see why people would be anti-free speech is if there's like a ulterior motive or a hidden operation to destroy America. And I mean, if that is your case, and that's some people's case, to be fair, some people think that, you know, all these people on the Democrats are here to destroy America and destroy the nuclear family, all that bullshit. But in reality, I just don't think that beds into what we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I'll try to soften it, but I do think you guys might be underplaying the realism of this, because I don't think I don't think the general population of any country is super concerned about one issue or is even politically or philosophically engaged in the importance of these concepts. And so like somebody might come from another country because of, again, like economic prosperity. It's the only place they want to go. They hear it's the best just because of a job. And they're not thinking about these other things, but they're bringing along these anti-free speech sentiments. So I think it's way more realistic than maybe you guys are thinking. Not all 50% of them, but like a large majority of them might just bring along, and this is just free speech. There might be other things that they disagree with, like gun laws or freedoms of other things, right? But we can soften this down a little bit and use like the Venezuelan example, for example. So these people have been living under a dictatorship and they don't feel comfortable speaking out against their current governance. They don't feel like they have that ability. If they move to America, it seems to me like they might be more passive when it comes to using their voice. They're excited about using it for the first time, but their threshold of what speaking out is significantly less than Americans. And so if you replace 50% of our population with a bunch of Venezuelans, they might not be anti-free speech, but their willingness to talk bad about the government is going to be less than the average American. And so as a population of America, we've lost a large percentage of our willingness to speak out against the government. And then if you have people from a bunch of different countries who share that sentiment, we slowly lose that. And that can be the same with free speech. You're not used to exercising your free speech. You don't feel comfortable exercising your free speech. That gets passed down from generations, and they don't want to utilize that. They lose that positive, momentum that makes them want to lose that. And I think that that's a somewhat serious threat if you take this with every issue and with every country. That's what people are fearing more so. But I do think it is a little bit more real that people would come here being anti-free speech, but accepting that that's just part of the American way. And then you like kind of begrudgingly assimilate, but you kind of don't like that people are able to say whatever they want. And then that kind of expands, further and further. So I think it is these kinds of cultural shifts, I think, are a little bit more realistic than maybe you guys are giving it credit for. But this is under this crazy hypothetical that 50% of the population comes here, which obviously is never going to happen. But imagine it's 5% from every country or 3%. You know what I mean? That's I think where immigration sentiment comes from.
I mean, I can understand what you're saying to a certain degree. But I'd also argue that regardless, American political culture and American laws are going to change as a result of more immigrants over time. But that's also just going to come from Americans in general. And a lot of these immigrants' parents, like the immigrants themselves, the immigrants' children, the immigrants themselves won't change the United States very much, or I'd have a very hard time believing that. But I could see where maybe their kids would say, like, well, these were the experiences of my family. Let's try to make this easier. If anything is going to change majorly, I think we might see the immigration system change. And you've had lots of, full-blooded white Americans advocating for these changes for a long time. So I think that's the one institution we would see get hit the most. Maybe guns, because you have a lot of pushback from tons of Americans in general. And then maybe if you get more people from a place like China or Mexico, where I'm assuming it's harder to get a gun, they might say, hey, this is a good idea. But a lot of the other laws, I just have a hard time seeing how anything would change drastically.
Yeah, same here. Even if they had like a sentiment where they're kind of, at the very least, not fully integrated with American culture, especially at the beginning, in some ways, their lack of involvement, because I can't see that happen, like lack of participation, lack of speaking out in the government, lack of willingness to kind of implore the Second Amendment, that will get mitigated very quickly the moment they have kids and are raised up in a public school. So even in that situation, I'm not really seeing the kind of drastic changes in values. And being here if they're going to be kind of unwilling to engage, then I don't see them willing to change at the same time. Overall, for me, when it comes down to this conversation, I understand the point. Like if you kind of generalize the notion, you can understand the logic. But I do think when it comes to conversations, it needs to be larger than kind of generalized notions, especially when you consider human nature. And I don't think human nature inherently, especially with like a system that currently exists, like right now, and understanding how people have been affected by different kind of migration throughout American history, kind of beds into this idea that America will collapse based off how our institutions are right now. Honestly, I think these people can be heavily influenced very similarly to Americans. And if my thing is for like immigrants who are coming in, it just advocates for something that I've always said consistently for both Americans and immigrants. Both of them don't know jack shit about politics. So we just need better public education and better assimilation all across the board because governmental.
I think you cut out, Riddell.
Yeah, we're barely cut out.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity, Danny, for you to answer the very important question that has been lobbed at you in chat.
Sure.
Do you know what you are?
I don't know. I like
in one word,
back.
you have to tell you
I'm
what
a
you
gamer.
are. Yeah, I can hear you, Riddell.
I'd say I'm a gamer. What would that be? Right now, it's Arena Breakout Infinite. That's what I've been playing a lot of. But also The Last of Us. I got back into that. I got that on PC.
I've never heard of that first one. I've heard of The Last of Us.
It's like this game, Escape from Tarkov.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, but it's like the free-to-play version and less cheater. Yeah.
Okay, you don't want to kill yourself after anybody does like something terrible to your base or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. All right, what do we do here that Riddell is now gone? Okay, hold on. Hold it down. But yeah, overall, I mean, when it comes to this whole, Bad Bunny crap, I think it's just really dumb. A lot of these criticisms. I mean, I'll be honest. I don't really much like him. I've stated this already. He just kind of seems kind of like a self-obsessed man. But I don't think a lot of these criticisms of him about being Puerto Rican are very fair. You can criticize his music. I mean, his music's apparently like basically porn, from what I've heard about it. But I think criticizing him for being Puerto Rican and being at the halftime show is another thing. I don't know what kind of songs he's sang. I don't speak Spanish. Maybe he sang really explicit songs, which I'm surprised that even the NFL would honestly allow, given the fact that even if there are Spanish people, but there were Spanish people watching, they'd probably be like, "Oh my God, what the hell is this guy talking about? I want my kids in the room."
Yeah, sure. Well, and it can't be worse than the litany of things that I've apparently heard Kid Rock say. So I think that we're probably good.
What the hell is Kid Rock said?
I heard him say something like something about thinking a 15-year-old was hot, or like apparently everyone's calling him a pedophile for something that like because of some interview that he had about. I don't know. I'd have to look into the lore on this to really.
Okay.
Like most of America, I have no idea what Kid Rock does or like.
Okay,
is,
so this is from a Reddit post. Cool daddy, cool lyrics. Kid Rock song about liking underage girls goes viral ahead of TPUSA halftime show performance.
Yeah.
So cool daddy girl. So apparently he wrote that when he was 30.
I do have thoughts about immigration that I want to say, but continue.
Okay.
This.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and state your opinion.
Yeah, so welcome back, Renato. Welcome back. Yeah, I did want to say one more thing about immigration. I do think that we might be underplaying the salience of like social contagions. I think that I'm trying to think of one that's been popular on the right wing. Like think about with the recent Alex Preddy shooting, how suddenly we are starting to question whether or not guns should be allowed at protests. Like that whole shift is a social twist. Like somebody in a prominent position starts speaking out or something happens that we don't like, and then somebody is able to weaponize this thing. I think that your friends around you or the people that are around you, if they have these opinions about free speech, it's a very slow change. But I definitely think that public sentiment can change pretty drastically, especially if a large group of people come in and start doing something via social contagion, not just legal means or other things. I do think like the most popular one is like the acceptance of LGBTQ like people and transgenderism has increased simply just because of public popularity in that. And so the idea is that people like countries might be bringing or the accusation from the right is that that's why it's increasing. I won't make a statement about that, but the idea is that people from other countries might be bringing something that has a social contagion aspect to it, like questions about gun rights, questions about free speech, questions about freedom in general, about capitalism, about, you know, these things. I think it's definitely a more real possibility than maybe what you guys are giving it credit for.
I understand. I completely understand.
Given
And
the hypothetical that I'm about the large portions of
fair,
it.
but I do think the reason why this conversation is valuable is because a lot of people think that this is going to happen in America. They just genuinely do. So I agree. And I go as far as that, yeah, the LGBTQ has been socialized to an so I go that far. My thing is, I just don't think this will be the case for immigrants. I don't think they have an influence on Americans like that. I just don't see it. And yeah, even if there's a large percentage of people, I think the only way I can go like, okay, sure, is if they became the majority. At that point, then yeah, there's the majority. They like clearly they're going to take over, or even closely touching American numbers. But even then, with how institutionalized Americans are and their willingness to be involved in the system, and of course the American individualism is super strong. Everybody talks about how we think we're all that. We're the shit. We're America. Well, we do everything better. That's the American idea. So I just don't see any country, any group of people coming in here and having an influence on how we think. In particular, especially like our political values and our identity. And
Yeah.
if we're really having a conversation on social contagion and how it's like negatively influence people, social media is way worse than immigration, and it's not even close. So
well, social media also can have the opposite effect. What I will say too is that instead of focusing on percentages of people coming in, focus on the percentage of the population that believes or doesn't believe in something. And so right now you have MAGA, who is like pushing these anti-liberal sentiments about freedom and stuff. And so we're already kind of a susceptible country. And so the percentage of people that would need to come in to change, to push that tide is rapidly increasing because of the way that MAGA is devaluing the freedom that we have here. And so you could also think about it like that, to where, you know, if you take a country that it already has some of these illiberal values, and then you bring them in here into a country that's already kind of questioning these things for no reason, it leaves us pretty susceptible. But I would agree that social media does a terrible job about this. I also think that it does a good job in some cases, but I don't think the proportions are tuned yet. So
I will play with your theoretical here, especially when it comes to the LGBT community. Immigrants, especially from Latin America, are more conservative when it comes to that, as well as immigrants from the Middle East, and I also want to say from Asia. The thing is, though, I don't think they're going to threaten homosexuality or LGBTQ rights, given the fact that the Republicans don't do a very good job appealing to these people. It's like if they really wanted to crack down on abortion and LGBTQ rights, you would think that the GOP would start trying to bring in more immigrants from socially conservative countries. Okay, maybe it's very common now in Mexico, but I've heard it's
People say
not
very
like it's.
common, but
Uh,
a lot of people can't name the percentage of transgender people here, and they'll say that it's 100%. You know what I mean? So I would
yeah,
love to see
Yeah,
stats.
Matt Wall
I'm not
saying that
disagreeing,
it
but
happens to millions of people like an idiot. Yeah,
yeah,
so
right,
but
right.
the whole point being though is I don't think that's going to have a that they're going to have a big impact in that way. And I'd also say that when it comes to LGBT stuff, it seems like a lot of it is exported from the United States around the globe. It really shows this dichotomy of the United States where we are extremely influential media wise. Everybody watches our stuff. Everyone basically learns English through it. And then our really weird right wing and left wing values wind up in like Mexico or Europe or Canada. Well, Canada's more susceptible, but Japan maybe like 5-10 years later. So yeah, I would not assume that the LGBT issue would like we'll become gay because of immigrants. If anything, we become probably more anti, and I don't think that's going to happen.
yeah, they do work against each other. I think the only way immigrants to actually, and before I even get to that, if I were to engage in this hypothetical in literally any other country that's not a dictatorship, um, I would be okay. Let's talk. America is super unique that how we influence everything around the world. That's why I just can't see any group of people coming into the country and changing how we are. I just can't visually see it. And I don't think there's anything anybody could prove to say that could happen in America. Now, if we're talking about how immigrants can like be influential, the only way I can actually see this happening is if an identity that already exists adopts them. And that's when the conversation gets dangerous. So at this point, they have their own individual values. But like Danny said, they can't really be adopted by MAGA because MAGA hates all of them that's not white, all of them. But most of these groups that are trying to come in the country are traditionally conservative. Like they just are. They follow traditional conservative values, and typically they're Christian, typically. But MAGA hates them. So even though a lot of them voted for Trump, they realize, oh, that was a mistake. So that's not going to work. They can't take that community again because how much they fucked up. And then on the left, because they're traditionally conservative, they can't really adopt them. And that's pretty much it. They're not traditionally conservative, so they can't adopt them. In the far left, they think that the far left has crazy ideas, especially for some of the countries that come from like more authoritarian and socialist type of countries. They're like, I am not really abiding with your belief because my understanding this has been very bad from the areas that I've come from. So there is no like group or identity that could truly adopt this like monolith of ideas. And if they did, we would have like monumental movements. That's why I think, like, for example, what MLK did was super valuable because it wasn't just black people that got on his side. All of these minority groups got on his side. Women got on his side. So at that point, he made drastic change. That is the only way I can abide by this principle, but it would have to be identified. It would have to be like integrated into already pre-existing American ideology.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, I would just, and I feel as if we maybe are circling the drain on this, but I do think that that all the things you're saying about immigrants, you know, being utilized by conservatives, or if you think that they're going to decrease LGBTQ sentiment by coming in, what I'm saying is that same possibility might exist with illiberal values. It might increase or decrease the illiberal values because the reason that they're coming in might have nothing to do with politics, but they bring those same sentiments, just like us importing a bunch of Catholics from Latin countries might increase the Catholicism that's in our country or something like that. I would just say that same thing could happen. And all of these pragmatic things about like, well, right now the conservatives won't accept them because they don't vibe with this thing or something like that. Yeah, true. Browns fan over here still. So, but anyway, yeah. So the idea though is that all of these things that are saying those are true, or why they can't integrate right now, those are true for now and with this group. But as soon as the conservatives find a way to utilize these different groups of people, now they begin to have that power. And so all I would say is once illiberal groups of people, like the communists and the fascists who are hiding among us, once these illiberal groups of people gain access to immigrant groups that share their kind of ideas, that's when we start to have those kinds of problems. And it starts as a small group, and then it gets louder and louder. And so the processes that you guys are saying is happening from liberals or from immigrants to the conservative side, I would say it could happen from illiberal people to, or liberal people to illiberal people.
All right. Yeah, I have no idea what you're saying, Danny. You're my cook,
beep boop,
bro.
beep boop, beep boop.
Yeah, you're cooked.
Robot voice, bro.
Cooked. I mean, yeah, we're kind of circling. I think this is just kind of agree to disagree in terms of like, I understand the notion. I just don't see the plausibility. I don't think there's any proof that it's plausible at all in America.
I don't think it's likely at all. I'm just saying that this is the fear, and I think that not taking it seriously will lead to this being true in like very rare circumstances. I'm just saying it's worth noting as a real fear if we really don't take it seriously. I think that if we're very susceptible to this, I think it's very possible, but I don't think it's likely at all.
I guess to wrap this up, that if I were kind of to think of a way to properly integrate it, it would just be better education. I think that's kind of my core thing. I think it would help all across the board in terms of assimilation for both Americans and immigrants. So this is never happening. So everybody kind of gets familiarized with the liberal core ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And I would agree with you too. Although ironically, sometimes when you push liberal values, that can come off as illiberal because you're like forcing liberalism down the throats of. I think this is BS, but whatever.
Yeah, I agree. Have to convince them. You got to convince them that this is what they want. That's just how you have to do it.
So that sounds kind of no, but I see what you're right. You're right. I definitely think education is kind of the key to this, and understanding politics, because the scary part is that a vast majority of people in the globe just have no sense of the bigger picture, like of politics, of general philosophy of like countries. Like people don't think this hard, and they're very susceptible to different views. Like it may seem crazy that you could be as a liberal person, you could be convinced to be illiberal. Like it seems crazy, but that's because your political knowledge is way higher than the average American, and so it seems like kind of a crazy idea. But I do think it's. Yeah, I know some of my family who are very susceptible. Yeah.
Understanding the average person's point of view is very valuable, which is why I try to do my little question and answer with that one MAGA guy. And that was brutal. That was just, no matter what I said, it just wasn't reaching that noggin.
That was insane.
Yeah, but don't worry, people. We're going to have more MAGA people on the podcast.
Let's go.
I'm not I think the newest one, I have one that's coming on, and he was on Fox News recently. So he's pro. I think he's pro ICE. Yeah, pro ICE. So that should be.
Let's go. That should be a big episode, dude. That's awesome.
That should be great. All right, we're about to wrap things up. Danny's connection went out. I know how that feels because that happened to me too. I agree. Liberty, xenophobia will always exist. But yeah, we can always, as long as the institutions are strong enough, we should always be able to move past it. But any final words before we wrap this up?
No, I think this was good. I'm glad that a conversation about the Super Bowl led into some actual substantive conversation and disagreements about immigration. If this halftime performance did one thing, it was lead to good convos. So I think this is great.
For sure. And it's like Kareem said, good luck keeping your sanity. Hey, my mental is strong. I be seeing insane stuff all the time in the comments, so I'll be able to handle that guy pretty effectively. I'm just gonna. The one thing that I have to do when engaging with Meg in particular is they have like this weird like fringe. It's kind of like flat earthers. They know these weird fringe facts that I have to make sure I know what the hell you're talking about. So that's what I'm probably going to do with this guy as well to engage properly. Um, all right. Well, with that said, unless you have anything you want to say pretty briefly about the Epstein files, because it's technically in the title.
You know, the only thing that I would say is that those emails with Elon, like begging Epstein to come on the island, are some of the most, like, just the purest cringe I've seen politically in a very long time. I was laughing so hard just having those, just reading those. Those are so bad. But other than that, no, I don't have any substantive thoughts.
Yeah, the Elon stuff was bad because he tried to separate himself, but he wanted to party with the dude. Howard Lutnick was bad because he said, "Oh, I stopped talking," and then we found out you were still talking to the guy later on. Some of the redactions are really bad because there's claims that they're redacting like high profile names for some freaking reason. No, expose these names. I don't know why we're redacting them.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the allegations, and I'll say allegations so I don't get sued, but some of the allegations regarding Trump is insane. There's a lot of things saying that he actually did stuff with underage women that people are alleging.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a theory, it's an actual like on the table allegation at the moment. So it just ruins his credibility. But I will say this every single time, and I have to say this: just because someone's name is in the files doesn't necessarily mean that they have done weird shit. That's very important to note because Epstein was very powerful and had a lot of money. So sometimes you talk with bad people. How many times have people seen stories of like, oh, I didn't know this guy was a PDF file, and I've been hanging out with him for how long? So
yeah,
always keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, you're very right. Yeah, other than that, I don't have much to say about it other than, you know, accusations are important, but they're just accusations until you get something a little bit more substantive. And then, like what you said, just because your name's in the files doesn't mean that you're doing something bad. But I don't think any of us would be surprised if Trump was doing exactly what the accusations say he was doing. I don't even think conservatives would be surprised.
This guy asked a semantics point. I'm fine with semantics point. Allegations more than theory. I did say that. I guess that's how you perceive it, because an allegation is something that's a little bit more tangible, and has a little bit more credence because it's based off a perceived he say she say interaction. So it's much more involved than a theory that uses can use very base, very superficial evidence to come to an overarching idea. So it's really how you look at it ultimately. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we got for today's open panel. Again, if you want to join, feel free to email me so I can talk to make sure you're a normal person before you come on. Feel free to join the Discord that I have as well attached, I'm pretty sure, to the description, or at the very least my link tree. But we'll be back next week, of course. You have a good one. Take care and peace.